My work, After Liberalism, which Princeton published during the last year of the last millennium, makes points, as I said, that remain relevant. I'm therefore revisiting these points in the time allotted for this presentation. After Liberalism analyzes the current Western form of government and, above all, its distinctive characteristics. Defenders of this government praise it as a sensitized state-of-the-art democracy, indeed as the only morally acceptable form of democratic governance. And its leaders do provide for widely publicized regular elections with an expansive electorate, one that may even include non-citizens and lately illegal residents. Democracy has become synonymous with inclusiveness, seen in the ever-expanding franchise that modern Western democracies feature, and seen equally in the claim of the governing class to be attending to the needs of everyone within their sometimes porous borders. This assumes vast managerial control and a ceaselessly expanding welfare state. Media-approved democratic rulers are exuberantly open to demographic and cultural transformation, and they seek to overcome what Western societies used to be before their forced march into the multicultural future. The Anti-Defamation League spoke for the present iteration of democracy when, in a pamphlet published last year, The New White Supremacy, it explained that Western civilization is a concept synonymous with white bigotry and therefore something that should be discarded. In recent decades, the managerial state has been at war with a putatively pervasive evil, namely prejudice. Colonialism, white racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, sexism, transphobia are just a few of the mountain of evils that managerial government claims to be fighting on our behalf. Although this reactionary scourge was long imagined to be at its height 80 or 90 years ago, it seems to be raging, or so I've been led to believe by news commentators and academics. Indeed, any turning away from our multicultural reforms can supposedly lead to a situation approaching the grimness of the Third Reich. Apparently, Donald Trump is already taking us down that road by eliminating personnel and programs from the federal bureaucracy, an institution that has increased in its staff by 45% since the year 2000. He also is taking away DEI, which was supposedly created to fight bigotry. Although it's hard to discern a Marxist core in this new dispensation, it's certainly not liberal in any pristine historic sense. This government is intolerant of unauthorized dissent and seeks to root out the social order that existed before its takeover. And this pre-social engineered world, we've been told, was so full of sexism, hate, that human relations now require close monitoring to avoid a return to the evil past. Thus, European governments now scrutinize the internet for evidence of hate speech directed against third world immigrants, a development that the state and the media there have encouraged. Please note that what I'm saying is not that we're dealing simply with, I think Russell Vogt this morning spoke of the woke weaponized administrative state. I think this represents a very definite alternative to constitutional liberal governments or governments that existed in the West before the development of the present form of democracy, what's called democracy, and which most of us would deny represents any kind of democratic form of government, but which seems to be, unfortunately, a prevalent kind of political order. The old liberal concerns with upholding a realm of privacy and setting limits on state power are now seen in Western countries as conducive to hate. A correlation that is hard to miss is the one between social permissiveness and political repression. Whenever the state grants a once unimaginable right, for example, to change one's gender or to marry one's mother or one's turtle, immediately a vast apparatus is brought into existence to ferret out and punish those who dissent from this innovation. It might be concluded that the establishment of a bizarre right has been carried out precisely to inflict exemplary punishment on those who defy the managerial state and its now public religion of wokeness. Another integral feature of our redefined democracy is a media conglomeration which sustains moral political consensus. Our news sources have less to do with supplying information than molding opinions and attitudes. Media-shaped political positions, as I discovered from research, are much the same throughout the Western world. Such uniform filtering of reality is far from fortuitous. It is essential for maintaining the international ruling class's hold on power. And while the current interpretation of popular government strives to liberate us from the prejudiced past, it also provides cheap migrant labor. Another achievement of our ruling class has been to establish a hierarchy of aggrieved minorities who supposedly enrich us by expressing their grievances. Based on this pecking order, the managerial state fashions its army of loyalists. It distributes rewards among privileged victims or their well-placed surrogates, while consigning others to the outer darkness of second-class citizenship. What's been described with admittedly broad brushstrokes is a regime that has succeeded the one that used to exist in Western countries. This multicultural managerial government enjoys mass support because it has the backing of the communications and culture industry, and most educational institutions, monopolizes violence, can even stage its own riots, and supplies what is defined as human services. That government has also suborned much of what our conservative establishment hyperbolically celebrates as the people. In the Anglosphere in Western Europe, the state can usually produce electoral majorities for the parties it favors, but if it doesn't achieve that result, it can in some countries cancel the victory of unacceptable victors, a course that the EU and the German government in particular have begun to pursue quite blatantly. Those parties that our ruling coalition and their allies want elected typically do get elected, and those parties that the system declares to be enemies, like the AfD in Germany, it rallies mass support to ban. If this political cultural arrangement does fall apart, that will be owing to its inherently unstable, self-destructive character. It will choke on its own diversity and nihilistic assaults on traditional human institutions. This regime's apparent cohesion depends on playing off claimants against each other. It requires constant mobilization against those presumed to be the ultimate victimizers, perhaps most conspicuously white male heterosexuals, and especially the ones harboring old-time religious and cultural propensities. Moreover, given what our society and culture have become, I could not experience the slightest shock when the mayor of Minneapolis on August 27th used the murder of children at a Catholic mass by a psychotic trans to bewail, quote, the hate that is being directed at our trans community, unquote. It's certainly no coincidence that white males are disappearing from TV films and advertisements. For example, when I find Russian nobility being depicted on my screen by African Americans with dreadlocks, or black women among the courtiers of Mary Queen of Scots and of other European dignitaries of centuries past. This may be connected to why CNN anchor Erin Burnett recently characterized Shane Tamura, the plainly black killer who committed slayings in a New York Midtown office building, as possibly white. Whites are the race to be excluded and even demonized. Thus, Doreen St. Felix tells us almost boastingly at The New Yorker, quote, that whiteness fills me with lots and lots of hate, unquote. This now prominent essayist refers to the Holocaust, quote, as a fake racial psychic trick, one that's been perpetrated on blacks by self-justifying white Jews. Meanwhile, Hungary, which looks to me like a traditional parliamentary republic, has become for the Western media a right-wing authoritarian hellhole. That's how a Western government is described if it fails to allow gay instruction in public schools and declines to accept third-world migrants into its territory. Lest we forget the woke left's version of reality, the latest issue of Foreign Affairs offers a feature article on the Weimar Republic by a Harvard professor which provides this admonition. Today, this chapter of the Weimar Republic's history should be revisited at a moment in which democracy is backsliding into totalitarianism in places as varied as Hungary, India, Turkey, and the United States. It is a reminder that democracy often erodes slowly at first, via the gradual surrender of those entrusted to defend it. Apparently, in all these cases, the absence of an authorized leftist multicultural government is to be equated with a slide into Nazi tyranny. Conservative media commentators would insist that my perception of a leftist takeover of vital institutions, starting with the administrative state, represents at most a transitory problem. It will go away once enough people vote GOP and watch Fox News. What is left unmentioned is how long and how thorough this takeover has been. The anti-discrimination regime on which we live has taken form over decades, and it built on a centralized welfare state that had developed here and in other Western countries even earlier. To me, it's apparent why the changes we're witnessing have been generally understated. For the left, what's happening is entirely welcome and consistent with its agenda. The left screams each time it fails to advance, but certainly approves of where Western societies have been taking us for decades. Among establishment media conservatives, which does not include us, there's obvious concern about turning off certain voters. Our establishment conservative media are still courting, for example, moderate feminist and gay advocates, viewing them as perhaps the older, more winnable social left before the more recent one turned to gender transitioning of children and other stomach-wrenching expressions of wokeness. Conservative apparatchiks are also concerned with their professional and social standing, and perhaps afraid to be too far out of step with leftist media colleagues. In my own work, however, as in this book, I consider precisely those earlier stages in this leftist hegemony. My focus is not on excoriating the past, but in understanding the more problematic present. Toward that end, we must piece together the process by which we lost our freedom and were stripped of our traditional social and moral values. Of course, in the left's war against injustice, it's not clear that what it condemns as unjust, e.g., making gender distinctions, preferring heterosexual unions to homosexual ones, accepting binary differences as normative and natural, requires collective atonement. While earlier governments and media efforts to address discriminatory behavior may have been at least initially well-intentioned, our crusades against discrimination have not led to consistently happy results. Aided by political coercion and social engineering, attempts to overcome the past have worked to obliterate our inherited family order, and particularly in Western countries, to extirpate any sense of nationhood. It is understandable that English patriots are now flying the St. George cross flag and the Union Jack to protect the practice of their governments welcoming into the country boatloads of third world migrants. Prime Minister Starmer and the English media have treated this protest as an act of hate. Furthermore, one-time highlighted victims of prejudice have been reduced to victimizers, as more exotic victims, such as Hamas, are given the benefit of positive discrimination. Fierce competition among those with victim claims is already causing the regime and its allies worsening headaches. These difficulties may demand even more scapegoating of reactionaries, in quotation, to divert attention from internal fragmentation. A question that we should ask ourselves is why the conservative establishment has failed so miserably at holding the line on social questions while implausibly denying the losses suffered. Let's not pretend that establishment lacks media resources. It's been an integral part of a mass communications network and conversation for decades. The yielding of ideological ground by many conservative celebrities seeking social respectability and lucrative careers has contributed to the right's defeat. They, not we, have been the privileged opposition to the left. The Trump administration, I'm happy to say, has given us the opportunity to place restraints on the kind of regime that my book outlined decades ago. And speakers at this conference have focused on the ways in which these problems of government overreach and outrageous social engineering have been addressed. But future success will depend on the ability of this counter-regime to keep the left, and by now it's an international left, at bay. And as my polemics, for those who read my weekly scribblings, suggest, this task may still be daunting. The complacency of our conservative establishment and its insistence that our adversaries are disintegrating before our eyes it may generate, or has generated, an unseemly overconfidence that the right must avoid at all cost. Thank you for listening to me.